Most utility CEOs will always talk about is balancing reliability, affordability, and environmental stewardship.
Several industry sources are reporting a 25% rise in demand by 2030 and a 78% rise by 2050.
If you can't keep the lights on, you don't get to have that other conversation.
People want a reasonable, reliable energy source that's not going to cost them too much.
I know people have been focused on let's remove fossil fuels, but believe me, that is not going to be as easy as people think.
Thank you for joining us on the What and Why podcast. We're excited to have you all with us here today. We've got a great guest who I'll be introducing. I want to tell you a little bit about what we'll be talking about today, and I'll introduce our guest. So all of us in the industry are interested in, and dare I say, concerned about what I call the load growth challenge. I think we all see it coming. We kind of know what the drivers are around AI and data centers, but also electric vehicles and just the broader electrification efforts as well. So there's definitely some interesting things going on in the space. So we're going to jump over to someone now who I think can really share his experiences from a very long, very successful career in our industry. So it's my pleasure to introduce John Di Stasio. Many of you may know him from his most recent gig, where he was the president of the LPPC, or the Large Public Power Council. I've had opportunities a few times during my career to work with the LPPC, and great representation of those large public power entities, of which I would say I have a vested interest because I'm a SMUD customer. And I always add I'm a happy SMUD customer. Not coincidentally, John was also the former general manager and CEO of SMUD, and he ran that for about 7 years. Just very briefly, a little bit about John. He's been in the public power space for over 35 years. He's been involved with the Northwest Public Power Association, the California Municipal Utility Association, as well as the LPPC. Lots of other organizations. I think one other highlight that I would bring out is he was the Large Utility CEO of the Year from Electric Light and Power in the year 2013. So John's very active in the industry. He's testified before Congress and FERC. He's represented our country and been involved in international energy issues. So it's our pleasure to have John on board with us here today. We've done a little prep leading into today's episode, so I think we're ready to have a great discussion. So John, welcome to the What and Why podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Great to be here, and great to talk about these important topics.
Yeah, for sure. So as I alluded in my opening remarks, this load growth challenge is kind of the cloud that's starting to form over our industry. Our industry is very resourceful. I think we have a really good track record of being able to meet these types of challenges. And when you look at load growth, a lot of people look to the 60s. Air conditioning, right? We figured that out as an industry. But as you've heard me say, the background noise is, yeah, but they didn't try to reinvent the way that energy was being generated and delivered while meeting that air conditioning challenge. So there's some similarities, but definitely a few plot twists this time around. When you look at it statistically, I've pulled a few industry data points for us to open up the discussion. Several industry sources are reporting a 25% rise in demand by 2030, which sounds far off, but it's actually going to be here before we know it, and a 78% rise by 2050 compared to levels in 2023. Now, I think those are actually pretty conservative estimates compared to some of the other industry sources I've seen. So we've got a challenge ahead of us. So, John, I'm going to ask you to sit in that CEO chair, and you're reading these reports from the Department of Energy and other sources, and maybe there's consultants or your leadership team are telling you, hey, man, we got to figure this out. So as for the CEO perspective, what are their first thoughts that come to mind in meeting this large challenge?
I think one of the things that's kind of elemental to running a utility or thinking about utilities, obviously the manufacture and delivery of utility is always services is always a matter of physics. So and it's a matter of economics as well. So the three-legged stool most utility CEOs will always talk about is balancing reliability, affordability, and environmental stewardship. I would argue over the last several years, we've kind of got narrowly focused on environmental stewardship vis-a-vis climate change action. And in doing so, we've kind of imbalanced the equation. And so to me, job one is to get back to that balance and look at a system that is optimized and frankly durable enough to be able to serve the future loads that are coming. Some people say that, the statistics you put out there around growth, there is some thought that some of that may be a little bit overstated given the potential efficiency of the chips and some of the things that look like they may be breakthroughs. But even if you're 80% right, that's going to be a huge lift and a heavy lift. And we have utilities right now that are actually, in the name of environmental stewardship, retiring resources at the same time the system's growing, creating even a larger gap. So I think we need to take a step back. We need to look at rebalancing. We need to look at optimizing and solving for multiple things because, frankly, with the energy policy we've been working with for the last 20 years, probably, it's not going to be robust enough to meet this growth and still maintain reliability and still maintain affordability.
Agreed. It's ironic you mentioned the three-legged stool. We recently did a consulting engagement with a large utility where we talked about a three-legged stool. It was very similar to yours. Rate stability, system reliability, and the third one was clean energy. But we added that, and it's the customer that sits on top of that stool. And I think that I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I've talked anecdotally with people about it, when I've seen some survey data, most customers, they'll put thumbs up to environmental concerns or climate concerns, and then you start assigning a price to that. And the percent that are all in goes down pretty quickly. So I think this just reinforces that people want a reasonable, reliable energy source that's not going to cost them too much. I think the other dynamic of that is customers don't spend time, nor should they spend time, worrying about their utility services. Now, when they put a solar panel on the roof, they get an EV, they enroll in some programs, by definition, they're going to be more involved. They're actually now more like a partner to the utility. So I think that customer piece can't be not thought of when we get wrapped up in the details of our energy transition path and things like that. So let me take a step back and look at this again. So growing demand, we kind of know what any given utility's peak load is and what their capabilities are to meet that peak load. And even as that energy mix changes, what are some things that might be considered non-traditional approaches? I do a lot of work. I'm very lucky. I get to interview and talk to tons of people with different perspectives. It's everything from demand response and virtual power plants and energy efficiency programs, new fuel sources, what can scale. And by the way, let's not forget that there's things like permitting that are going to take years. So I'm asking you a very loaded question about maybe some non-traditional approaches as you look at this dynamic.
Yeah, to me, I really do think all of those that you mentioned, whether there's new fuels, whether there's microgrids, virtual power plants, consumer-sided generation and storage and capacity, all those things are valid. But I think we need to move away from saying let's pick this resource or pick that resource, and let's build a system that's optimized based on the attributes of those resources. Do they contribute to reliability? Are they there for affordability? Are they there for just environmental stewardship? And what is the right mix? There's a place for everything, but at the end of the day, the system has to work. It has to be reliable. I always said when I was at SMUD, and thankfully we were very well liked and had a great relationship with our consumers, but a lot of that was because we did the basics well. You have to have affordability and you have to have reliability. Then you can have a conversation about doing other things that might be non-traditional. So we had very good uptake in our programs for solar, EV, demand response. But I can promise you, if you can't keep the lights on, you don't get to have that other conversation. So those are just fundamental. And I'm no different. I'm an electric consumer myself. And if I don't have good reliability, that'll be my key focus. And I won't be thinking about whether it's affordable or whether it's the greenest resource mix. So I do think that that really is a price of entry conversation for customers. And then the last thing I would mention is we have so much built infrastructure in utilities. I don't know if it'll come to pass because there are economic hurdles and perhaps even some transportation hurdles, but I'm very interested in the future of hydrogen or frankly any other fuel because to the extent you could repower existing infrastructure with new fuels, that would be a game changer because for environmental stewardship, I know people have been focused on let's remove fossil fuels, but believe me, that is not going to be as easy as people think. It's not going to be able to be backfit with intermittent renewables at scale anytime soon. So natural gas at a minimum is going to be with us for many, many years or decades. And likely, if we can focus and transition to other fuels that can burn in existing infrastructure, I think that would be huge.
Well, I'm with you on all the above. I had a couple of comments and questions on some of the things that you said. Um, One, hydrogen, yes, and I think that from what I've read and talked to some different people, I'm by no means an expert. It seems like that's a case where fleets can lead the way because you can scale quickly with fleets. There may be some economies of scale as well. So I think that's one thing that as an industry we want to keep our eye on. When you talk about other new fuels, I've actually written a little bit about RNG, renewable natural gas. I think there's the geothermal is starting to have a little bit more scale to it. But again, these are all technologies that I won't say they're just kind of nipping at the corner of the problem, but they are arguably a smaller piece of that energy pie. I want to ask your thoughts on nuclear, having been at SMUD, which has a shut down nuclear power plant not too far from here, where my wife and I have swam in the cooling ponds a few times. So, um, but both large scale, and we are seeing some interesting movement there with Vogtle in Georgia, and I think it's called Palisades in Michigan. That's 800 megawatts that are going to come back online there. So large scale, I think we know what that can do. Of course, it takes a really long time to get going. But then the SMRs, the small modular reactors, where do you see either of these as a fit into that? Like I like to call it that energy pie where there's different slices with the different sources.
I think, I'm bullish on nuclear. I think nuclear can be uh, produced safely. It's powerful. We have a kind of an inexhaustible fuel source. Maybe there's newer technologies that do a better job with recycling waste and so forth. But I know that I'm happy for one to see a nuclear renaissance because it's such a big foundational part of the resource mix. It can be, and SMRs, the small modular reactors, as you know, a form of those have operated in the nuclear navy for
Like 70
decades.
years,
So
like 70 years, yeah.
yeah, so to me, this is a no-brainer for the technological capability of the United States, and I'm very encouraged to see the announcements made about nuclear investments in Pennsylvania that could be forthcoming. And I think the discussions about reopening 3 Mile Island, which I never would imagine in my lifetime. So I think that nuclear will have to play a big part of the mix because when you're talking about the load growth we're looking at and what AI promises in terms of its growth and expansion over time, you're going to need big building blocks of reliable baseload energy, and nuclear, to me, fits that profile very well, along with all the other things that you might use to generate power. And the other thing I would say is I do think it's very important to be clear-eyed about what I call the environmental trade-offs of any resource. So nuclear is clean, of course, from an emission standpoint. It has a fuel issue. But frankly, there's no resource that exists today that is benign. They all have an environmental consequence. It may be land use in solar. It could be recycling in solar and wind. geothermal has a significant secondary disposal issues. So my experience is when you look at all of them, having a portfolio that's optimized for clean is important, but none of them are inert.
For sure. And I'll add to your list energy storage and mining for rare earth minerals and kind of the havoc that wreaks not only environmentally but arguably socially as well. When you look at some of the places where that's being done,
we change the resource mix through policy. We jump to a new resource mix that has issues of intermittency, and so that gets solved by saying, well, let's put storage on it. And while storage like pumped hydro is great, storage like batteries, I'm very dubious on building out the whole system on something that not only has a mining component, but a significant recycling component, not to mention the time that the discharge of a battery, how much time it really offers the system. I mean, there's a role for it, but you're not going to replace things wholesale with renewables and storage, in my opinion.
yeah. And not to mention also the safety and the degradation issues around those large battery arrays. And there's other storage as well. There's iron flow batteries. You mentioned pump storage, which I really like. I want to talk about the landscape for a minute around the customer first and the regulatory landscape second. On the customer side, I look at, okay, we have this large growth thing looming over us. You know, if I'm a large C&I customer to a utility, and I've had that traditional relationship for years or even decades, and I'm looking at the industry, maybe I'm a facilities manager for a large manufacturing company, right? I'm thinking, okay, and we're growing, by the way. The widgets that we make, and boy, they're really selling. Or we're onshoring stuff from China now, and we're going to double our capacity over the next 5 years. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to just be talking to my local utility. You know, I'm going to be talking to other third parties. And I think where I'm going with this is in terms of the customer / competitive landscape. You know, I'm going to start looking for some alternatives. What can we do with on-site generation? You know, how reliable are some of these other alternatives? Have you run into that at all, just in all the work that you've done with associations and with the regulatory picture? Where do you see that shaping? Because I think we're moving that direction.
Yeah, I have run into it, but I can tell you, in talking with companies, and I can mention companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they really don't want to own and operate generation. They would prefer that the utility become a good partner and figure out how to meet their needs. And that's what I've seen. They're willing to invest their own capital. They're willing to have on-site generation, but generally they would prefer that they do what they do best, which is in the tech world, and not get into operating utility infrastructure. So to me, I think they'll go where they need to go ultimately, but I think the first preference would be our partner and help us figure out how to get there, and you guys own and operate the generation. And that's generally what I've seen, and I've seen it work out favorably if the utilities are willing to come to the table and be a little bit more creative about even doing unique rate tariffs that are more like a private-public partnership. And so I think there's ways to get there. You mentioned one thing that is not fully in control of the utility, and that is permitting, and that's why permitting reform is so important. I mean, transmission line takes a minimum of 10 years to build, and you think about generation, yeah, you can probably site and build a gas plant fairly quickly, but a nuclear plant's a significant uplift. So I think the federal government needs to, and state governments need to also work in partnership. Certainly they need to be good regulators, but they need to work in partnership to, if this is a competitive imperative for the United States in AI, then it's going to take government also being at the table as a partner.
For sure. And I do want to talk about the regulatory landscape, but a couple of things you said are pretty interesting. Yeah, the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, I don't think they want to be specifically in the energy business. They have a lot of money, but they've probably looked at that and said, you know what, that's not a competency that we have, and there's a lot of risk and a lot of expense. But I do think that they're going to lead a lot of the change. I have seen Google had an RFI out for companies, utility companies and third parties. Maybe you're aware of this, on the to bid on transmission infrastructure. They're trying to find a way to fast track this stuff. And I think that, to your point, utilities have to get really flexible really quickly, which leads us back to the regulatory compact that has driven our industry for a long time.
One of the kind of unfortunate circumstances when you peel back the layers on permitting, a lot of the transmission is getting built within organized markets or regional planning constructs. And if you look at the planning queues, that is the line for projects to be interconnected that would support transmission being built, it's flooded, and a very small amount of those ever get built. There's a lot of speculative generation projects and different things. And I do think one of the permitting reforms that needs to also occur is having a more rational way to prioritize what gets built. And to me, developers need to, if they want to build a project, they probably should come with some skin in the game, and maybe control of the land for where they want to site a project, or have already done some of the permitting work. But just to say, I want to get in line, and if everything falls in my way, I'll build this, is not a good way to manage the queues.
No, and the clock is ticking, right? So that doesn't exactly help. And there's local government entities, there's state regulators, there's the federal government with probably half a dozen different entities, EPA, DOE, NERC, so that is a huge challenge. Let me ask one other question that's kind of a little bit of a diversion from this. What do you think of this, in general, localized generation, as opposed to let's build massive solar and wind farms, in Kansas or West Texas, and build the transmission infrastructure? I understand the arguments for both, but there's another argument that we need to do stuff on a much more localized basis, maybe even at the distribution level, wherever possible, which could lead us back to SMRs, but maybe there's other things that are possible as well.
Yeah, so my preference, and certainly when I have my experience at SMUD, having local or regional generation, in our case, it was hydro, and we had natural gas, we had other assets, helps you actually avoid the need for transmission, because it's expensive, and it's certainly expensive if it's not utilized fully. So my concern with building large wind and solar projects a long distance away, and then building transmission to bring them in, my idea with transmission is it always should serve that three-legged stool. If it doesn't help with imports to reduce prices, if it doesn't improve reliability through transfer capability and resilience, and it's simply just what I would call a generation line to clean renewables, I don't think it's optimal. I actually don't support that. I don't think we have plenty of low-cost energy. When it shows up, sometimes is the problem. You can look at what happens in the ERCOT market when the wind may blow at night and then not other times. And so energy isn't the issue. We need energy and capacity, and we need affordability. So I will be a broken record, but we can't imbalance those things, or we're going to spend money for suboptimal solutions.
Well, I think that's a drum that we need to continually beat. So I'm with you there. Let's change the pace here a little bit as we move towards wrapping up. I have a couple questions I want to ask you that are a little bit outside of our current discussion, but I would love for you to share, if you could, one thing that you love about the utility industry. You've been in it a long time. I've been in it for 35 years. I think we both have a passion for it. So what are some things, or maybe the one thing that really stands out for you that's brought you the most satisfaction and fulfillment in our industry?
Well, of course, like everybody, when I first went in the utility industry, I went in because it offered me a good job. But what I learned over time, and what I really fell in love with, is it's an industry that's foundational. It's you're operating, building and operating critical infrastructure. And I did a lot of international work. And what you see is every place that has a decent electrical system, their economic outcomes, their health outcomes, the quality of life, all of those things rise, and they're directly correlated to having a good electrical system, a good utility system. So to me, it's foundational, and it's contributing to all of the other things that society wants to do. And I really love that part of it.
I agree. And when I think about it in those terms, sometimes where I land is our industry is almost a victim of its own success, because when we're not in the newspapers or on the TV news, we're doing our jobs, right? So and that picture is evolving. Final question for you, and this was kind of a fun one. Tell us something about yourself that won't show up on your resume or your biography that maybe a lot of people don't know about you.
It might be in my bio, I'm not sure, but I've had a parallel career, as you know, in farming for 35 years, and have grown wine grapes and also walnuts, and that's just been a great different type of a way to put your energy and enthusiasm and intellectual curiosity. And so I've really loved it. The only thing that I will say that has been a problem with farming and being in the utility business, especially if you have hydro, you end up worrying about rainfall all the time. But other than that, it's great, and continue to do it now. And I'm very happy to say I'm a fourth generation farmer on our land, and that's quite a treat too.
That's neat. I knew it had been in your family. I didn't know you were fourth generation. And is your family still involved beyond just yourself?
Yeah, so our oldest daughter and son-in-law are involved. So hopefully it'll continue, and generations five. And it's hard to know who wants to do this in the future. I love farming, but the one thing I'll say is, if you're going to farm at the level I do, you better have another really good job. So
Okay. All right. All right. Good career advice. Good career advice.
yeah.
Very good. Well, listen, thanks so much for sharing your insights. We may want to revisit this with you again sometime. The industry is, as you know, it's very different today than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. In my 35 years, I've seen it go from not static, but very incremental rates of change. And that is completely different today. So we may want to revisit some of this stuff with you, which has been great. So thanks so much. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. And please join us on future episodes of the Watt and Why podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.